Picture a mammoth, full-grown adult, 4 meters tall at the shoulder, 6 tons of muscle and fat wrapped in a shaggy coat, equipped with tusks that could disembowel a predator with a single sweep. An animal that made the ground vibrate when it walked. An animal that had survived ice ages, crossed continents, and outlasted every predator that had ever tried to make a meal of it for millions of years. Now picture a group of early humans approaching that mammoth. They are shorter than you are, they weigh less than you do, they have no claws, no venom, no armor. They cannot run faster than the mammoth, and they cannot overpower it physically in any direct sense. They do not look dangerous by any standard that a mammoth has had millions of years to calibrate. And the mammoth runs. Not always. Not immediately in the very earliest stages of human expansion into new territories. But eventually, consistently, and then permanently. The large animals of every continent that modern humans reached began exhibiting fear responses to human presence. And the animals that did not learn to fear humans fast enough are, with notable consistency, the animals that are no longer here. The question of why animals feared ancient humans, and why that fear was, in the long run, entirely rational, is one of the most revealing questions you can ask about our species. Because the answer is not what most people expect. It is not primarily about strength or size or ferocity. It is about something more subtle, more terrifying in its implications, and more uniquely human than any physical attribute. It is about intelligence applied to killing. Systematically, collectively, and across timescales that no other predator has ever operated on. Let us start with what animals were actually dealing with when they encountered early modern humans for the first time. The first thing to understand is that the fear of humans by large animals is not universal or ancient in the way that fear of, say, lions is universal and ancient. Prey animals are afraid of lions because they have been coexisting with lions and being killed by lions for millions of years. That fear is written into them genetically, refined by countless generations of selection that eliminated individuals who were not sufficiently afraid. It is automatic, fast, and deeply embedded in the nervous system at a level that does not require individual learning to activate. The fear of humans is different, and the difference is visible in a remarkable phenomenon that biologists call island tameness, or ecological naivety. Animals on islands that have had no prior exposure to human hunters show dramatically reduced fear responses to humans compared to mainland animals of the same or related species. Galapagos finches will land on your hand without hesitation. Antarctic penguins walk up to researchers with what looks like curiosity, but is actually simply the absence of appropriate fear. Island bird species before the arrival of humans would sit calmly while a human approached and picked them up. The fear is not there because the selection pressure that creates fear is not there. No humans meant no predation, which meant no cost to being unafraid, which meant fearfulness was never selected for in the population. The animals are not stupid. They are simply inexperienced with a specific kind of threat they have never encountered before. This tameness, this ecological naivety is precisely what early modern humans encountered when they first expanded into new territories during the Great Human Expansion that began roughly 60 to 70,000 years ago and accelerated dramatically after 50,000 years ago. The megafauna of Australia had never seen a human hunter. The megafauna of the Americas had never seen one. The birds of Madagascar, the giant moa of New Zealand, the elephant birds of the Indian Ocean Islands, none of these animals had any evolutionary reason to be afraid of a small, upright, hairless primate walking towards them. They were behaviorally naive relative to the actual threat they were facing, and the consequences of that naivety were catastrophic and remarkably swift. This naivety was not stupidity, and it is important to say that clearly. The animals were responding correctly to their actual evolutionary history. They had learned over many generations to fear the specific predators that had historically threatened them. Large, carnivores, whose hunting styles, scent signatures, and behavioral patterns they could recognize and respond to appropriately. They had not learned to fear a small, upright, mostly hairless primate that moved in groups and carried objects, because that particular configuration of threat had never existed in their world before. Their fear responses were correctly calibrated for the world they had evolved in. They were simply not calibrated for the new predator that had just arrived. So what was the actual threat? What made humans so dangerous that naive animal populations were eliminated within a few thousand years of human arrival? And what made educated animal populations develop and maintain intense fear responses that have persisted across thousands of years? The first and most fundamental answer is weapons, specifically projectile weapons, tools that could kill at a distance far beyond the reach of any non-human predator. No other predator on Earth kills from a distance in the way that humans do. The lion must get close enough to make physical contact. The eagle must get close enough to seize with its talons. The crocodile must get close enough to bite. Every non-human predator, without exception, must close the distance to its prey to the point of physical contact before it can kill. This constraint shapes the entire predator-prey dynamic across all of nature. It gives prey animals a window of safety. If they can detect the predator and create sufficient distance before the predator can close the gap, they survive. The prey animal's entire defensive architecture is built around this constraint: detect early, respond fast, create distance. Humans eliminated that window entirely. A spear thrown with an atlatl, a lever device that extends the effective throwing arm and dramatically multiplies force and range, could kill a large animal at 30 to 40 meters. A bow could kill at 60 meters or considerably more with a skilled archer. The prey animal had to be aware of the danger from a much greater distance to have any margin of safety at all, and detecting danger from that distance is genuinely difficult when the threat is an upright primate that moves quietly, does not particularly smell like a predator, does not produce the growling or roaring vocalizations associated with large carnivores, and does not look like anything the animal has a pre-built fear response for. The physics of projectile weapons also fundamentally changes the cost-benefit calculation for the predator in a way that has no precedent in natural history. Non-human predators face real injury risk in virtually every hunt. A lion attacking a zebra risks being kicked. A wolf attacking a moose risks being stomped or gored. These risks are real enough that predators consistently avoid prey that are likely to fight back effectively. Large, healthy adults of many prey species are actually relatively safe from non-human predators for exactly this reason. The predator simply cannot afford the injury that attacking a healthy, vigorous, full-grown adult would likely involve. Humans with projectile weapons do not face this constraint in any meaningful way. A human throwing a spear at a mammoth from 30 meters is not at significant personal risk from the mammoth in that moment. The asymmetry is total and unprecedented. The human can attempt to kill an animal many times its own size with essentially no personal risk, because the killing is done at a range the animal cannot reach. This completely and permanently changes the strategic landscape. Animals that had evolved to be safe from predators because of their size, their strength, or their ability to fight back were suddenly not safe at all. Their primary defenses, like bulk, horns, tusks, hooves, the ability to injure anything that got close, were simply irrelevant against a predator that never got close. The second major factor is group coordination mediated by language. Human hunters did not hunt alone. They hunted in coordinated groups with communication, planning, and tactical flexibility that no other predator in history has possessed. Coordinated group hunting exists in other species. Wolves, lions, orcas, chimpanzees all hunt cooperatively to varying degrees. But human cooperative hunting is qualitatively different in a specific and crucial way. It is mediated by language. Humans can plan a hunt before it begins, assigning roles and contingencies. They can react to changing conditions by communicating specific information in real time. They can debrief after a hunt and incorporate what they learned into the next attempt. The cognitive loop that human language creates around hunting — plan, execute, observe, communicate, learn, revise, plan again — is something that no other predator can match or even approximate. This meant that early human hunters could develop and implement strategies that were genuinely beyond the capacity of their prey to anticipate or counter. Drive hunting, chasing large animals toward cliffs, into bogs, or into narrow canyons where they could be killed at low risk, required coordination across multiple individuals over extended distances and times, communicating through signals and calls in ways that had no recognizable predator signature for naive prey. Ambush hunting required the ability to predict animal movement routes accurately enough to be in position before the animal arrived, which required accumulated observational knowledge that was shared and refined across individuals and across generations. The knowledge component of human hunting is crucial and often underappreciated. Human hunters accumulated detailed knowledge about specific prey species and shared that knowledge across the group and across time. They knew the seasonal migration routes of specific herds. They knew where individual watering holes were and which animals used them and when. They knew the behavioral signatures that indicated a specific animal was vulnerable: old age, injury, isolation from the group, unusual movement patterns. This knowledge was not individual knowledge that died with the individual who gained it. It was collective knowledge that persisted in the group's oral traditions and grew richer and more detailed over generations. No prey animal could adapt to a predator that was simultaneously learning about it faster than it could evolve defenses, coordinating with other hunters in real time through language, attacking from ranges that were entirely outside any evolved defensive response, and passing accumulated tactical knowledge to the next generation without any of that knowledge being lost between generations. The asymmetry of learning rates between human hunters and their prey was, in the long run, perhaps the most decisive asymmetry of all. The third factor is persistence. Human hunters could track prey across distances and timescales that were far beyond anything other predators managed. The persistence hunt, following prey at a sustained speed below the prey's sprint threshold, but above the prey's comfortable walking pace in hot conditions until the prey overheats and collapses, is one of the most distinctive human hunting strategies. In hot environments, particularly at midday when large mammals are most vulnerable to overheating, a human group can pursue prey over distances of 20 to 30 kilometers, driving the animal ahead of them until it can no longer cool itself adequately and is forced to stop. The prey runs. It escapes easily in the short sprint. It thinks it is safe. And then the humans appear again over the horizon, still following, still tracking the footprints. And the prey runs again and again, until it cannot. This strategy works because of a convergence of human physiological traits that are unique among large mammals. The human ability to sweat over the entire body surface provides dramatically more effective evaporative cooling than panting alone. This means humans can sustain vigorous aerobic activity in the heat for far longer than most large prey animals before reaching dangerous body temperatures. The prey overheats and stops. The human does not. The prey falls. The human eats. An animal that has been pursued to exhaustion by this method cannot simply learn to run faster or farther. It cannot adapt behaviorally to counter a predator that will literally follow it until it dies. The only available adaptive response is to detect the human threat early enough to avoid being in the pursuit situation at all, which requires a fear response that triggers at much greater distances and on much more subtle cues than fear responses for any other predator. The fourth factor is fire, and fire changed the nature of human predation in ways that go far beyond simply providing warmth and cooked food. The deliberate use of fire to drive animals, setting grass fires to channel herd movements toward waiting hunters, burning vegetation to create openings that concentrated game in predictable locations, using torches to drive animals from cover or toward cliffs, extended the spatial scale of human hunting to something genuinely unprecedented in the natural world. A group of human hunters with fire could effectively manage the movement of animal populations across landscapes of very large size, creating hunting conditions that no animal could recognize as predation because it did not resemble any predation they had evolved to recognize. A grass fire is not a predator. Animals have deeply evolved responses to fire. They flee from it, because natural fires kill. But a grass fire set by humans to drive animals toward an ambush is a predator deploying a tool. The animal cannot distinguish between a natural fire and a fire set with hunting intent, because no animal before humans had ever set fires with hunting intent. The behavioral response to fire was shaped by natural fires across millions of years of evolution. The specifically threatening configuration of human-managed fire was brand new and unrecognized as a predation strategy. This is a recurring theme in what made human hunters so uniquely effective against unprepared prey populations. They consistently operated across categories that animal cognition and animal fear responses were not equipped to handle. A spear is not a tooth or a claw. A coordinated pursuit across 3 days is not an ambush in the grass. A managed grass fire is not a natural wildfire. The hunting was so different in form and structure from anything the prey had evolved defenses against that those defenses were consistently, fatally inadequate. The fifth factor is selective targeting. Humans hunted selectively in ways that no other predator matched, with population-level consequences that were uniquely severe. Most non-human predators target the most vulnerable individuals in a prey population: the old, the sick, the young, the injured. This leaves the prime adults largely intact and tends to be self-limiting in its population-level impact. Human hunters targeting the largest and most calorically rewarding animals often hit prime breeding adults directly. Combined with the inherently slow reproductive rates of large mammals, a mammoth reaching reproductive maturity at perhaps 15 years, producing one calf every few years, this type of selective hunting pressure was dramatically more difficult for prey populations to absorb than anything they had evolved to handle. The ecological concept of the landscape of fear is worth introducing here because it helps explain not just why individual animals were afraid of ancient humans, but how that fear restructured entire ecosystems in ways that are still visible and measurable today. The landscape of fear is a model developed by ecologists to describe how prey animals distribute themselves across a landscape, not just based on where food is available, but based on where predation risk is concentrated. Animals avoid high-risk areas even when those areas contain abundant food, accepting lower nutritional intake in exchange for reduced predation risk. The fear itself shapes where animals go, how long they stay, and how they behave, which in turn shapes the vegetation of those areas, the soil composition, the water flow patterns, and the entire ecological structure of the landscape. Fear cascades through ecosystems in ways that are as powerful as the predation itself. Human hunters created landscapes of fear that were qualitatively different from anything prey animals had experienced before. The specific locations associated with human danger, watering holes near human camps, migration corridors that humans had learned to intercept, open terrain that offered no cover against projectile weapons, became areas that animals avoided even when food was abundant there. Animals modified their movement patterns, their activity timing, and their habitat use to minimize exposure to the human threat. In some cases, this behavioral modification may have been as ecologically significant as the actual predation, restructuring the distribution of large mammal biomass across entire landscapes, with downstream effects on plant communities, river hydrology, and soil dynamics. The specific character of the human threat also produced another adaptive response in prey animals that is rarely discussed but is genuinely fascinating: the evolution of human-specific alarm responses that are distinct from responses to other predators. Animals in areas with long histories of human presence respond differently to human stimuli than to the stimuli of other predators in ways that are finely calibrated to the specific nature of the human threat. The sound of human voices, even at low volume and from considerable distance, triggers flight responses in many large mammals at distances that the sound of a large carnivore would not trigger. The smell of human presence, fire smoke, cooked food, human scent triggers alert responses at distances that the smell of lion or wolf does not. The sight of an upright human silhouette on a ridgeline triggers alarm in herding animals that would not be triggered by a quadrupedal silhouette of similar mass. These specific responses are not innate. They are learned at the population level through the elimination of individuals who lacked the appropriate sensitivity. They are calibrated specifically to the human predator in ways that reflect the specific features of human predation that made it uniquely dangerous: the distance at which projectile weapons could kill, the terrain features that humans used for ambush, the smell signatures that indicated human presence before humans were visible. The animal's fear response is, in a meaningful sense, a model of how humans hunt. It encodes information about human predation strategy in behavioral architecture. This is, from one angle, one of the most remarkable tributes to human hunting effectiveness that exists in the natural world. The animals that survived long enough to learn what kind of predator humans are did so by incorporating that knowledge into the structure of their fear responses, at a resolution and specificity that reflects precisely the features of human hunting that made it most dangerous. The landscape of fear that human hunters created is written into the neurology and behavior of every large mammal species that survived the encounter with our species. The combination of all of these factors, projectile weapons that killed from distance, coordinated language-mediated hunting, persistence that outlasted any prey animal's endurance, fire management that manipulated entire landscapes, selective targeting of prime breeding adults, and the creation of ecosystems of fear that reorganized animal distribution across continents, created a predator that was genuinely unlike anything any ecosystem had ever produced before. The animals that encountered this for the first time had no evolved response to any of it. The ones that survived long enough to develop appropriate responses developed them the hard way, by being the descendants of the individuals who were afraid enough, at sufficient distances, on sufficient cues, to avoid being killed before they could reproduce. The result is the modern wildlife response to humans that wildlife biologists observe across every ecosystem where humans and large animals have coexisted for significant periods. Wild animals treat human presence as a serious threat, requiring immediate response at distances that would make any other predator seem harmless. A deer that would walk within meters of a wolf will flee from a human at 100 meters. A hippopotamus that charges lions without excessive hesitation gives human hunters significantly wider berth. These are not irrational responses. They are the accumulated behavioral inheritance of millions of generations of individuals whose survival depended on getting the response right. The animals were right to fear ancient humans. Their fear was not irrational. It was not an evolutionary mistake. It was not an overreaction. The animals that were afraid of ancient humans, that gave them the widest possible berth, that responded to their presence with immediate flight on the faintest possible cue, those were the ones that survived. The ones that were not sufficiently afraid are gone. Every large mammal extinction that correlates with the timing of human arrival in a new territory is a data point in the same argument. The most feared predator in the history of life on this planet is not the largest, or the fastest, or the most physically formidable. It is the one that learned to use tools, coordinate through language, manage landscapes with fire, and accumulate knowledge across generations without limit. The animals understood this eventually at the population level. It took a while for us to understand it about ourselves.